What is going on, you guys? It is your boy, Average Bob, and welcome to episode 2 of the Average Bobcast, where we talk about all things Giants, free agency signings, rumors, and just everything from a fan's perspective. There's a lot to address this week between Danny Dimes and Saquon and all the deals that were made. But I think first off, I do want to address the jersey that I'll be wearing this episode. I've been kind of going down a deep eBay wormhole recently where I'll just search like Giants, Mets, Rangers, like my favorite teams, and look at all the old school stuff that they have on there. And I came across this one, which was a Jeremy Shockey 2004 All-Star jersey. I don't know when I'm ever going to actually be able to wear this. Like the actual shoulder, this is almost like a real jersey, how big the shoulder pads are. Do like an accurate thing. It's like actually kind of a little preposterous, but I don't know. I figured I'd just wear it on the podcast today because I bought the jersey. And if you're listening on Spotify, sorry, you probably obviously can't see because it's audio only, which brings me to my next point that we are also launching on Spotify as well, which is pretty awesome because I've been a fan of podcasts for, I don't know, probably like the last 13, 14, 15 years. So launching my own podcast is pretty freaking cool. Something I never thought I would do or could do. But the technology is there. And so is, one thing that goes alongside with that is the passion and wanting to do it. So let's give it a shot. And obviously last week's episode, was our first one. So it's kind of a work in progress outside of the normal videos that we usually shoot here. But yeah. So with that, let's dive into the Giants content for today. I'm not sure if anyone's actually going to be able to take me serious if you're watching on YouTube. But the first thing, as was reported across the football globe last week, was that Daniel Jones signed his 4-year, $160 million contract with $35 million in incentives as well. Per Tom Pelissero, Jones would have been the youngest quarterback to ever get the franchise tag, which now they're using on Saquon Barkley instead. So on last week's episode, we really spoke about, what would Daniel Dimes' contract look like, re-signing him, the reasons for, and potentially, if it didn't work out, what would actually happen there. So it's been great to actually get him back at the long-term deal, which allowed the Giants to use that franchise tag on Saquon. Another tweet from Jeremy Fowler at ESPN, which I'll display on the screen here, is that you'll see that the year one cap hit coming in for Jones is around $19 million, which is great to see there because that gives a ton of flexibility in terms of signing other free agents to build a team around. And I believe it was my guys I love over at Talking Giants, Bobby Skinner and Justin Pennick, had a infograph too discussing, with Danny Dimes' contract from a cap standpoint, it's only 17-ish% of the actual total salary cap. Why that is huge, reason number one being that it's not as astronomical as some of these other contracts where you pay your starting quarterback so much that there's no other money to pay anyone else on the team. And that hamstrings everyone, right? When quarterback gets to that second year of the contract. So with that, having said that, that gives the Giants more flexibility. I think this is what Dable and Schoen had up their sleeve sort of the entire time because, again, like I've said, they're both in their first year in this new role, and they don't want to be a one-and-done thing. They need to build a team, and the only way to do that is through the draft and also free agency, but to do it through free agency, you have to have the money to do so. And through the draft, you have to have the money to pay guys once they do get to their second contract. And then having said that, around bringing Danny Dimes back, I'm super excited for that. And that it seems like a pretty solid deal for the team. I don't want to, when you look online, everyone's talking about how they overpaid, blah, blah, blah. And it's honestly, who cares? One, it's not our money. Two, we can still build a team. Now, the real work starts, that we're bringing back Danny Dimes, Saquon. There are some holes, obviously, that need to be addressed on both sides of the ball. But in this video today, I'll spend some time talking about wide receivers and how we could address those. And then also the offensive line, which I think there are some names floating around there as well. But bringing back Saquon, pivoting over to that, they used the non-exclusive franchise tag on Saquon which is great because they can still somehow, with giving that franchise tag, you can still negotiate with him long term. This isn't something that is immediately like, this is the franchise tag and that's it, which he is being tagged for $10.1 million for next season. So pretty nice chunk of change there, but it also gives him the flexibility to re-sign as the season or offseason progresses. And obviously Saquon does want to be one of the top paid running backs in the league, but I don't think, and it's the quote here is Saquon wants to get this done, but reports state that Giants aren't willing to go higher than around $13 million to do so, as Barkley's camp is looking in the $14 to $15 million range per season. Obviously, for negotiations from a free agency standpoint, you have what you think you're owed. And obviously, the player is going to always say a higher amount, right? Because why would you ever lowball yourself? I think that goes for anything in any career, right? Everyone wants more money. They're not going to say like, oh, yeah, like obviously $10 million to a normal person is a lot of money, but I want 14 or 15 million. And then that's where the Giants can say, we're not doing that because that's 2 or 3 less million that we'll have to build other positions. And I think that's where the negotiation process comes into play. But regardless, we got 2 of our young studs back in Saquon and Danny Dimes, both with a lot of momentum also on their side, coming off of almost career years. Especially, Danny Dimes really put the team on his back and evolved as a leader that he much needed to do with limited options outside of just Saquon. Another fun fact from our friend Art Stapleton, who had a tweet saying that Daniel Jones is the first Giants first-round pick to receive a contract extension from the Giants since OBJ, when OBJ was extended, he played 12 games that year and then was traded to Cleveland. Pretty crazy stat considering that Odell was drafted in 2014 and no one's been re-signed after their first or signed an extension from them. That's kind of pretty crazy to think about. And I think that is obviously, goes back to just the GM situation that has occurred. And obviously, I think Gettleman gets a lot of hate and deservedly so for his free agent picks, but I think he's done a decent job drafting for the most part, especially recently when you look at, how good a guy like Dexter Lawrence has developed and stuff along those lines. So more to come there. And then just talking about the dynamics between Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley and why we needed to pair them together. Because when you look at the stats when Daniel Jones is playing without Saquon Barkley, he has thrown 16 touchdowns and 17 interceptions for 6.2 yards per attempt and a pass rating of 77. So much lower than all of his stats when he is playing in the same offense with Saquon. The passing touchdown interception ratio, 44 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. And I think, a much higher yards per attempt alongside, a higher passer rating as well as significantly higher at 91.4. So why that obviously is important, besides that the numbers just tell you there, is because they are a duo, they're a tandem, they complement one another, right? When you have Saquon Barkley in this offense, right, we talked about it all season. He is crucial in opening up the pass through his run game, right? When teams are trying to stack the box and force you to, and everyone knew it was coming, right? And obviously the first half of the season, maybe people slept on Saquon a little bit more because he didn't have the best track record coming off injury-riddled seasons. But moving forward, as the season progressed, probably at the halfway point, you started to see a downtrend, whether that would be from injuries, being nicked up, playing significant amount of snaps for the first time in a long time. And then also that there was a lot put on film. Teams could game plan. Teams could figure out exactly what the Giants were trying to do. And it wasn't really, teams didn't really have to guess too hard at a certain point, right? The Giants have terrible wide receivers and they have an all-star running back. They're going to run the ball, right? It doesn't, you don't have to be freaking, I don't know, Bill Parcells to figure that out, So I think it's great that they're both back together because I think they complement each other in different ways. Obviously, Danny Dimes got really good at running the ball this year through leveraging his legs. But I think, they need one another to be successful. So I'm glad that they are married together for at least one more year through the franchise tag for Saquon and a longer-term deal for DJ. Up next on the list of things to talk about, I did a whole video kind of talking about the greatness of our guy, Sexy Dexter Lawrence. Jordan Renan out of ESPN, who covers the Giants, said that talks with representatives between the Giants and Dexter Lawrence's camp on a long-term extension have begun, per Joe Schoen. So straight from our guy's mouth, right? Joe Schoen said this is happening. The Giants are working on it. That is amazing news because, like what I mentioned earlier in that Dexter Lawrence video, where the Giants, obviously Dexter Lawrence right now is in a completely different camp from all of the other Giants D tackles that we've drafted and let walk over the years, whether it be like, Barry Cofield, Jonathan Hankins, Linval Joseph, where guys never really made it to their second contract or were able to walk out. And they were really good players. Like, I love some of those D tackles, right? They were big hosses in the middle of the line. Well, Dexter, I think, is obviously way more advanced in from a playmaking perspective and taking over games. So I think just making him a long-term part of the team is absolutely 100% one of the best investments that this team can make based off of his durability, right? He plays in every single game and pretty much every snap. He's also evolving to such a point. I don't want to compare him to Aaron Donald because I think Aaron Donald, when it's all said and done, could be one of the best D tackles to ever play in the NFL, right? Like, he has just insane stats, and like when you watch him play, he's like, also one of the biggest psychopaths ever. Like, in this day and age, you never see a guy every single game like grabbing another offensive tackle or center or guard by their neck and try to strangle him. So he was a psycho as well, but I guess all those guys are a little unhinged. Dexter's, I think, just a shade below that right now, and I think the best for Dexter Lawrence is yet to come. I think the time to pay him is now and let him just settle into that role. Obviously, as time goes on, he will still continue to evolve as a player, as a leader, and as a member of the Giants organization. So I think it's just an absolute great move to get done now. Moving ahead, I said we were going to talk about some other Giants wide receiver options, and I guess maybe let's just jump back a little bit. I was going to touch on one interesting individual, but let's just talk about one we've seen play a lot on the Giants the last number of years, and that would be Darius Slayton. And we've seen some great things from Darius Slayton, some highs and some lows. And in this infographic from Michael Parrott, it's very interesting, right? Because Darius Slayton ranks as one of the only free agent wide receiver in this class under 30 who ranks in the top 5 in all major receiving categories, being receptions, yards per receptions, and touchdowns, which is interesting to see, right? Because you look at this, and I don't know if this is like Michael Parrott works for Darius Slayton's like agency or something, where they're like, put this out there, like, this is a great fun fact about Darius Slayton, or maybe they did their due diligence in looking at all this information. But the stats make him look great, right? Like, compared to everyone else in this class. And is that necessarily the guy that we've seen? I would say no. Like, watching it, is he a top 5 wide receiver, you think, in this class? I don't know. I have to look at the whole free agency list again, but like, it doesn't, sure as hell does not feel like it after watching him play for so long. And I think, he had some pretty key drops. And what's disappointing about Darius Slayton, I believe, and he did have a great rookie season and rapport with Danny Dimes to start. And I think he had that sophomore slump. And then he was kind of like in a weird sort of spot where, I don't know, obviously tons of guys were getting injured the last few years, and then you had like freaking Mike Glennon playing quarterback, Colt McCoy playing quarterback at various times, so obviously that doesn't do anything for our wide receivers. But I think he could have stepped up and made a little bit more plays, especially, to evolve to that next level where, listen, I preached about this all season. The Giants needed someone to step up in the wide receiver position, and if Darius Slayton did step up, he'd be the number 1 name on this list from a free agency perspective because the Giants literally had no one else. So if he could have really done what he needed to do, he would 100% be locking in a pretty substantial contract, if not with the Giants, somewhere else with teams that just hand out money to, like, you look at like the Jaguars handing out $75 million to Christian Kirk, or, I feel like the Cardinals are always giving out like terrible, contracts to wide receivers that are like smaller and don't really do much. So there's teams that will pay, a guy like Darius Slayton a longer term contract in that ballpark. So Darius Slayton, I think, could have done more to solidify that for himself, but also made our team better from a passing and receiving standpoint. Up next on the list, our familiar friend, Odell Beckham Jr. had a workout on Friday for 12 to 14 teams in Arizona, and where he was running around making one-handed catches, obviously on air. But all reports are stating that OBJ looked explosive. Looks like he's back to form a little bit after tearing his ACL in the Super Bowl. So yeah, I mean, this is be interesting to see. The Giants were there, and even last year, like the Giants, Bills, and the Cowboys were kind of involved with potentially bringing him back towards the end of the season, but it never really worked itself out because I think Odell just really wasn't really feeling 100%, and teams just didn't want to take a risk to add him and have him learn a playbook within 2 weeks. Then you got the playoffs starting, right? So like, who does that really benefit, especially when teams have a good locker room and they get through a whole season and get to the playoffs? Is it worth throwing in someone who, by all of the media standpoint, is a controversial character? It brings questions. It brings, notoriety. It brings the media asking tons of useless questions about, the state of your team, where everyone just gives the PC answer, like, we're so glad that he's here. He's a pro's pro, blah, blah, blah. But, And honestly, by all accounts, everyone on the Giants seemed to love him. I did a whole video about this. If you go back, I did this, maybe earlier last season, but it was kind of an OBJ sort of career retrospective where I spoke about his entire career sort of up until the season. So yeah, if you have some time, check that out. I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I think it's probably my best video to date. So please go ahead and check that out if you can. Anyway, this wraps up episode 2 of the Average Bobcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I think if you want to comment on who is like maybe one of your favorite players from, not necessarily your childhood, but someone you really loved who might not have been the best player. Because I think that's why when I saw this Jeremy Shockey jersey up for auction, I was like, holy shit, I got to bid on this because, I don't know, I just, he was such a crucial part of like my early young childhood of maybe like middle school or whatever when he was on the Giants and talking shit and catching touchdown passes over Eagles defenders and like yelling in their face. Like I absolutely loved Jeremy Shockey to death. And when I saw this, I don't know when I'll ever be able to wear it again, but for today it was fun. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and listening, and have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you guys next weekend.